Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back with you again. My name is Lowell Applebaum. I had the pleasure of joining you for a learning already once, and today we get to talk about the fun that is communication and really thinking about it through the lens of clarity, through care, through confidence, the critical work that you do as an organization, as you do as individual volunteers. I mean, without good communication, how are you going to do any of that? My implication there was not for your camera to be off. Everyone's welcome to have their cameras on. And throughout the presentation, there's going to be 2 or 3 moments where we're going to reach places that rather than hear my voice drone for an hour, what we want to do is to create spaces for you to have the opportunity to speak with a few of your colleagues about where the things I'm identifying as places of communication strengths or communication needs are places you get to talk about how you incorporate that into your work with Mended Hearts, with your own journeys that have brought you to this moment. And so hopefully a shared learning for us. I'll share some things with you, and then you'll share some things with one another. I feel like we should start with just why we need to talk about this. What are obstacles to impactful communications today? In Zoom, there's a chat function, right? If you look at Zoom, you'll see that there's a little thing that says chat. And so I would love just to start. I mean, there's over 30 of you, so I'm not going to have you at this moment unmute. But if any of you have the ability to type in chat a quick answer or two, as you think about where communication obstacles exist today, what would you say? What would you say impedes good communications today? I would love to have some of your thoughts. I promise I've done my homework. I have at least 5 answers for you that I'm about to share. But before I sort of steal the stage with mine, if anyone wants to share any of theirs, we'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Uh, hmm, pre preconceived notions of a person or situation, right? What you assume before you're there. Context, different language, saying the same things, but different language can mean different things. Poor training. Uh, I think there's a specific context there, but also I'd say perhaps training in life, right? About how we communicate well with each other. Hearing challenges for sure, thinking about those obstacles. Confidence is really good, right? How do we go in and how do we uh, do so from a place that's not about ego, but from a place that's about empathy, but also sure in what we have to say. I love those. There's good ones there as well. Uh, I'll share just some of mine, right? The first I would say is that as we think about communication, we are in a day and an age where our attention has gotten shorter. And I use these as examples. If you have any sort of subscription service that you subscribe to, Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, what have you, what I'll say is that my children are growing up in a day and an age with no advertisements, right? The concept of pausing to listen to someone trying to tell you something is almost foreign to them that they wouldn't choose what that is and when they want to hear it. And the same is true as you look across other platforms as well. If you look across a platform like YouTube, you can skip ads in 5 seconds. I was driving across the country a few weeks ago, and my Spotify wasn't working, and I turned on the radio, and oh my goodness, there were so many ads. And I know that like I listened to ads when I was younger. I'm sure there aren't more now. But the patience that we have for being sold to, the patience we have for someone telling us something that we didn't ask for, has just really diminished. And as we think about the communications we put out there, whether that's from an organizational level of how we are communicate, or whether that's from an independent or individual level of how we communicate, right? Certainly a challenge to communications is just this concept of when we feel like something isn't for us, what happens? I'll just say from a place of input and retention, right? If I was to say over the course of your time for this evening session, you're going to go back to 5 emails in your inbox, 6, maybe 500 emails in your inbox, right? We are sort of inundated in all of our channels with communication. And the number of those that we're actually able to retain is difficult, if not near impossible. The example I just used from my own life, I have an organization I belong to. I'm a fellow of this organization, right? I've been a chair of their overseeing commission of their credential. Like I am uber involved with this organization. I can't read their emails anymore because I get 20 to 30 emails a day between the various communities I'm a part of, between the volunteer stuff I've done, between what they're trying to sell me. I don't have 45 minutes a day to carve out of my life just to focus on their emails. And I use that as again as an example, but as we're thinking about a conversation we're going to have here on communication, certainly the quantity of communication we have coming in to us at any time is overwhelming at moments. And for better or worse, the majority of the communication that we receive is trying to make us aware. Now, perhaps the conversations that you have in your volunteer work is a little different, right? Because you have the opportunity to infuse more invitation, to infuse more deeper listening. But that's too rare in the communications that are expressed. As we look at some of the challenges that you put in the box, even when we have someone who's just trying to sort of crack our head open, shove more information in our brain, and close our heads closed, that's what we get all the time. And it makes any type of communication that's about awareness. You should know this. You would be better if you knew this. We want you to come to this thing, to do this thing, to follow. Awareness is incredibly challenging. And I've seen it even in colleagues, and when I work with those that are in the medical field, that they express that the ability for families of patients to retain the instructions they're being given, they've just seen a real decline in that ability to retain that information, right? That ability to be aware of what they're trying to be told. And I actually had a colleague who called it awareness saturation, right? What is the amount each day that you can take in of someone trying to give you new insight, new information, or new perspective? What is the capacity you have in any day for that to actually leave a mark and to be deeper? It's important for our conversation because as you think about as individuals, as leaders, as volunteers, uh, the own ways that you're going to phrase things, that you're going to frame communication, to just recognize that when your communication is framed as I need to make you aware of something, that you're going to run into a higher level barrier of retention that automatically is going to come with that. And just the time and space to listen. We live in an ever more noisy world. Where do you actually carve out the time for the quiet, right? Where do you actually carve out the time that what you are trying to hear, there's actually space to hear it? The never-ending news cycles, the never-ending ads being sent your way, that wherever you go, there's noise. Where is it? This little thing, right? That's supposed to actually help create space for us, takes up space from us, and especially that's true in the listening realm. If you are somebody who has meetings that run back to back, I'm sure you find this as you go between rooms talking to individuals. What I will say is that the experiment I would encourage you to try over the next 3 weeks is to take just a few of those moments, a few of those back to back to back meetings, and to see if you put in simply, I would love 5 minutes, but I'll ask for 2 minutes, right? If you put in 2 minutes of white space, where you use the first 60 seconds to sort of close your brain out of where you left. What was the conversation you were just in? What do you need to remember about the meeting you were just in, right? What do you need to close that? And then you use the next 60 seconds to put yourself in a mindset of what do I need to focus on for what I'm stepping into? Who's going to be there? What are they going to need to address? Right? Just even a 2 minutes there of, I call it brain sorbet, right? But a little palate cleanser for your mind. That if you're able to do that and put in the intentional breaks in between one to the next, instead of just running from one to the next to the next to the next, what you will find is that that gives your brain the space to honor what's been and be ready for what's to come, much more than if you don't. Right? When you jump from one room with conversations to a next, when you jump from one meeting to the next, you bring with you the baggage of the one to the next. Right? And so This is a challenge to listening to communications is how do we individually create those spaces? And sometimes when we're in the room with people, with clients, with those that we're trying to care for, creating a space for a moment of pause can be helpful as well. Uh, Silence is not always the absence of something to say, right? Silence is sometimes creating the space to think about the things that need to be said. But we often get so uncomfortable with silence that unless someone invites a minute of like reflection in the room, someone will try to fill the space. So I'll just say in the work that you're doing, as you think about more intentional communications, that's not always about all the words you say. Sometimes it's about creating the space to find the right words. And I would just invite you to think about where you have the opportunity to do that. And then we live in a world where we're expecting more to be personalized to us, right? When you get an email, you get a message that says, Dear volunteer, dear member, dear constituent. Do you actually read what comes after that at this point? Right? That's not the world we live in. We live in a world that we're expected to be known. And especially the more that we share about ourselves, the more we expect an organization and a company, a whoever it is, to know who we are. And if I'm being transparent, in the day and age of AI, like all the more so, we're expecting this because there's inherent hyper personalization that's possible that comes out of tapping into that. And so, where in the communications that you put forward, do you think not about the rinse repeat that happens from, uh, I've had a conversation like this before, I'm going to have it again, I can just go in with a similar script? But where do you try to leverage what you know about who you're going to be talking with to try to customize and personalize it so they feel it's about them? Right? The more that you seek to know, and we'll talk in a little bit about questions and starting from a place of inquiry, but the more that you seek to personalize and know, the more that we are going to feel heard and feel seen. And so that as an obstacle that we need to focus on. There are other obstacles as well, but at least those are sort of the top five that I see. And I pull it all together into sort of a single question, which is who do we believe today? And I'm speaking to you at this moment as like volunteers and leaders, right? Like as we think about where belief comes from today. If you're going to go out to eat and you have your phone on you and you open, I don't know, Yelp or some other open table, an app of your choosing, right? What do you look at before you decide what restaurant to go to? Often it's the reviews, right? What did other people say about the place? Or if you're going to buy something on Amazon and you're going to bring it into your home, what do you look at before you buy the thing? Besides the price, right? The reviews. You're trusting complete strangers about what to put in your body and what to bring in your homes. And that's because we make resource investment decisions today based on the suggestion of colleagues. We make trust decisions today based on what we hear the narratives of people that we trust say. All the more so, just to give an example, if you were to buy a new car, before you buy a new car, many people are like, all right, Facebook Hive Mind, what car should I buy? And you believe the person that you were in second grade with, however many decades ago, more than the car salesperson, right? This is literally how we are deciding to utilize our resources. And resources isn't just money, although it is that, right? It's also how we decide where to give our time, where do we decide to give our energy and our attention, where we decide even who and what to trust. If that's the case, right, if we make decisions of where to invest ourselves today based not off of an organization's mantra or the pretty PDF we receive, but because it comes from a recommendation from another source, especially a trusted source, that means that the role you play as a volunteer and as a leader in particular is more essential than ever. Right? What I say is that that means that you need to have a responsibility there to be a not just a sufficient but excellent champion of an organization. Right? What is it that Mended Hearts brings and does that is of service and of contribution? And how do you champion that well in a very personal way? The frame usually used for that in an organizational context is a champion of mission, right? And so what we mean there is that a champion of mission can be a respected peer, right? Someone maybe in a leadership position, which you just get by being a volunteer. As soon as you raise your hand to represent the organization, you're in a leadership position, right? But then once you have that, there's an opportunity to be a voice, to share the story, the purpose, the focus, the effort of like why this organization is distinct and what you're doing is distinct, right? And with that can come the opportunity for you also to, instead of starting from awareness, to start from invitation, inviting others on the journey with you, whether that's recruiting other volunteers or even the journey of invitation for those that you're trying to listen to and to provide some semblance of comfort to and space for, invitations for them that this isn't just about input, but is about a mutual dialogue. If you think of yourself not just as a volunteer, but as a champion of mission, then sort of the responsibility that what you recommend and what you have to say is going to influence how others decide to spend their time, their resource, their efforts is a critical place. From a very practical place, right, I'll just say that there's many ways for you to be a champion. Some of these work well, some of these don't, right? But there's uh, ways that you should, for yourself, ideally sort of determine what does being a champion mean to me. Like some are really good at being champions of voice, right? That may be if you're here, that being a champion of voice and communication means you're good at speaking or representing. Perhaps you like doing this, right? Like talking to dozens of people. Perhaps you prefer the individual one-on-ones, right? But like knowing what your strength is there. For some, they like to champion more by authorship, right? Where can you provide support from a place that's a little more behind the scenes, but could be a place that is going to provide insight or narrative or story. Or perhaps you like to be a champion by moderating other conversations, right? That we are going to be able to bring others' voices to the table. And we're able to leverage the expertise of elevating others' voices. And sometimes being a champion of voice just means sort of hosting the space for others to contribute, being the one who welcomes, that creates the space for others' communications. That you want people to feel not just invited, but that when they are with you, when they're communicating, that they're part of the conversation. I would just say as well as we think about the opportunities we have, for sometimes it's a champion of image. We live in a world that sometimes people connect better, not to the spoken word, but to what they can see. Right. And so if you're in particular moments and times that you have the opportunity to take a photo, perhaps a selfie, my kids would say, right? But like a representative image of what it looks like for what you're going to be talking about, that unto itself, those documentation and imagery can be very powerful ways to champion an organization what it's trying to accomplish. Sometimes that is when you have a particular conversation that has great depth that you know others could benefit from hearing, having the wherewithal to ask the person you're talking with if they told a particularly powerful story, if they'd give you permission just to, right, turn on your Zoom recorder, turn on your phone recorder to capture that testimonial, to capture that narrative if they give permission so you can have the story, or even intentional interviews so that you can bring about some of the stories of what you're experiencing. Because ideally, all of you are storytellers, right? That's part of what your role is. The communication here that we want to see when it comes to narratives, it's going to be so critical for what you're going to be able to bring forward. I want to pause for a moment. I saw a comment come in, so I just want to see what it said because I had a reaffirmation from it as well. All right, John is saying in the past we looked for professional journalists for those recommendations. They were people that were paid by consumer goods companies to support media outfits. Today, we ask amateurs for recommendations, right? Which changes who we're asking, not that we've looked to it. I love that comment, John. I think that's really true. Uh, I think that also makes all of you celebrities. Look at that, right? Because you're being looked to be powerful communicators. You're being looked to be trusted. And for what we're talking about here, that means that we need to look for you to be able to bring ideally where your strengths are, when it comes to that. And that's going to lead to, I think, our first moment to take a step back and have a brief conversation, right? If we were to ask you, what are your preferred places for saving as a champion of mission? Like, where do you find that you are able, from a place of internal strength, to be an effective champion? I'm going to, in a few moments, send you out to have a few minutes conversation of where you find your own strengths come through in the efforts you put forward. I've put in here, so you get a slide deck after, a series of questions so that afterwards, if you want to take at the slide deck, you can actually do a sort of one-on-one interviews with people within the organization to say and learn what their preferred styles are for how they want to be a champion. You'll get that, and that will be like a take-home exercise that within your work, you want to find out what someone's champion preference is. So ideally, you can align how they best use their voice to the opportunities you can offer. But for today, right, like where do you find your voice best applied as champion, and where are you most comfortable using it? Where do you wish it was used? So let's start with that as just sort of the first moment to take a pause and to have you all talk to each other so you're not just stuck with my own voice for a moment. And we'll bring you back in about 4 or 5 minutes, hear if there's been any interesting realizations. And then I want to go into a conversation around inquiry, if we can, around asking better questions.
Hey, Lowell, could you put
Yes,
those questions in the chat so we can see them when we go into the rooms?
I can do that. If you give me just a brief moment, let me pull
Thanks.
them and I will do that. Yeah. Here's question one. Here's one. And here's two. There you go. Questions in the chat.
Thank you.
I'll see you back in just a few minutes. Have a good conversation. Places to think. I will say, for the purpose of our time, since it's flying by, if you heard anything particularly really insightful in your breakout, I would just encourage you to share it in the chat so that we can all learn from your wisdom. I want to spend a moment just going through and really thinking about uh, inquiry, if we can. Because ultimately, as you think about the rooms you go to visit patients, so often it's not what you have to say, it's the questions you ask that open the doors, right? And so I'm using an organizational context here, but I just want you to think about the quality of the questions. So from an organizational perspective, right, I think about organizations that say this is our new strategy, right? And they want to get you, the volunteers, voice in on it, right? And what is the difference between if you receive a what do you think versus a if we use these priorities to guide the next chapter of our organization, what potential do you see for mission impact, right? It's a very different question. Or let's say that you're talking to somebody and you're, whether this is a patient conversation or a colleague conversation, and you're looking to hear about the future of what's important. Do you only ask them what keeps them up at night and identify their fears and challenges? Or do you also ask them what gets them out of bed in the morning, right? What is their hopes? What do they want to hear? Right? If you're going to evaluate, if you put on a program for patients or you put on another one, how do you evaluate it, right? Do you just ask, how would you rate this program? Or do you ask people, what will you remember about what you just experienced here next month? Anything specific? Or if you were asked by a colleague about where you were today, what's a high and a low you would tell them? My point is the different questions bring about very different types of responses, right? And I have to do at least one personal one, right? When you get home at the end of the day, if you have someone that you do come home to, or four-legged, two-legged, whatever variety, right? Someone that can ask, is the question you ask when you get home, how was your day? Or do you ask something like, what was a moment today where you heard something interesting? You asked a great question, you learned something new. Or you ask, was there a moment today where you're just shaking your head, where you walked away with less energy? Or do you ask, is there anything that happened today where you were brilliant but nobody saw? Or do you ask, do you not want to talk about today, but we could just sit here for a moment together without talking? Right? So often that, to be clear, that's still you asking about someone's day. But my point is the different and more intentional questions will lead to different answers. It will open different doors. It will make people more willing to communicate with you. So as we think about a frame of questions, right, we're talking about intentional questions and not just what comes off the top of our head. And that means that we should be really diving deeper into curiosity, right? The activity that you can try to do, if you take, this is another one to take back to do if you're surrounded by other volunteers, is to pair up together and to have one person turn to the other and just invite them to like a traditional family gathering, right? If you were to invite someone to your family's Thanksgiving dinner and go into why the event is meaningful, and have your compatriot, have your other volunteer you're with, just focus on being curious. I promise you what would happen is the person inviting would feel heard in a way that you don't usually. And the person who was curious, right, who put down the phone, who didn't look at their watch, who paid attention, would feel a deeper connection with the person who was they were receiving the invitation from. Right? Curiosity lies at the heart of that kind of connection. And so what do we mean by curiosity, right? The curiosity means that you have a strong desire to know or learn something. And so as you think about like the patient visits you've been doing, right? When you go into a room, and I love some of the chats about having to be able to read the room and know when someone is able and open to having a conversation or not, right? How do you tailor it so that you walk in curious? How do you walk in, tailor it, not with your agenda, right? But being able to be present for who you're walking in to hear and to communicate with. Right. And I imagine in your own work, curiosity has a real place of learning, right? That what you are going to be able to do from curiosity is you're going to be able to come out the other side, having been able to learn about the people that you're connecting with, and that curiosity is the differentiator for us about something we want to learn versus what we have to learn. Right? Going in and reading from a script feels rote. It feels like something you have to do. And I would hope and what I would imagine is that what you're doing when you're having these conversations is not a thing of something you have to do, but it's a thing of something that you want to do, right? You're going in and expressing a desire to listen and to care in a way that's going to make a difference. And that means that curiosity demands humility. It means that you're going in leading with inquiry, that what you know in this world is insufficient, right? And you are here to learn from the person across from you. That what you're doing, the care, right, is they are going actually going to be a teacher for you if they're willing to engage with you. And that as a frame changes how we ask questions. Now I'll put out there, right? There's different types of questions. There's good questions, clear, open-ended, promote thought, right? These can move conversations forward. Uh, there's powerful questions that aren't only clear and open-ended, but can provide introspection. What we need to be careful of is we don't go into the realm of poor questions, right? The kinds that are vague, confusing, leading. We've all been in the room when someone has asked a question that they already knew the answer to, and they were just looking for you to answer the question so they could demonstrate they already know the answer to it, right? And so how do we think about and frame better questions? And I'll say from a bit of research, they say that there are sort of 6 factors that go into better questions. One of which is that within your questions, there's a clarity, right? That there's a clarity of what the question is trying to determine. It's easily understood, especially when you're speaking to someone that's in some type of distress or depression, right? When it's hard, the clarity of the question is going to be just as essential for you to be able to be heard and understood. Openness, right? Are you open to what the wide range of response could be? By the way, openness means the question may be met with a, I'm not ready to talk right now, or like, this isn't a good time, right? The question may simply be that, like, what you came in to bring them may not be what they are ready to receive. And so the question itself not being closed-ended, right? But you don't limit the potential for discussion with your question, right? Depth. How do you ask questions that aren't just surface level? Perhaps you start with something easier, but we get such limited time with people that asking questions that allow for deeper introspection can be ideal. Direction, right? Where are you trying to go with the question? What is the path you're trying to walk? What is the conversation for? Is it just to create the space for them to express something? Is there actually something you're trying to bring them? And ideally, good and powerful questions empower the other that you are communicating with, right? It allows them to feel heard or allows them to hear their own voice. And impact, right? Does the question itself actually allow uh, the answers you get to be able to have impact on their life and their journey? I know so many of you have been volunteering for years. The room I was in, I just saw the note that we had was in the room where I heard someone's been doing this important work for 25 years. I imagine that you've asked some pretty good questions during that time. And so your own philosophies of inquiry, I'd encourage you to put in the chat. But with your permission, what I'd like you to do is if you have somewhere just to jot down a few numbers. If you have a pen and a paper, if it's possible, and if you don't, you can try to keep track in your mind. But what I'm going to do just very quickly is to go through a top reflections of what it looks like if you are excellent at communication. And I'm going to ask you just for each of these to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, right? Where 10 is outstanding. 10 would be that in these areas, others should learn from you. All the way down to a 1, which is this is an area to probably think about from your own communication journey of where you could build strength. So we'll do this, and no one's going to look at your paper, I promise. But for yourself, how would you sort of self-assess your communication strengths? And these will be the places that we go through. So the first is really understanding when we say audience, and I say that because sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's a group, sometimes it's a family, right? But how clear are you on who you're about to address your communication to? What is the moment that they're in? How much do you know about them? Do you take the time before you communicate to put yourself not in the mindset of what you need, but in the mindset of who you're about to communicate to, right? Scoring yourself a 10 would mean that you are always cognizant and putting first the awareness of who you're communicating to. A 1 is that you're much more likely to go from communication to communication without really forethought about who you're going to be with. The curiosity inquiry we talked about, how would you score yourself, right? Are you someone that leads with curiosity, truthfully? Like, do you go in not assuming anything, but going in and wanting to understand, wanting to ask questions to understand? Or are you someone that like goes in and you know that often you're going in with something to say, with something to share, and you lead with that instead? Number 3, how would you rate yourself on how well you listen with patience, attention, and retention? Right? Do you rush through the conversations that you have? If it is a conversation that's not on the phone but visual in nature, do you inherently demonstrate that you are paying attention? And if it's just a conversation that's going to lead to a series of conversations, do you make the effort to retain what you are told, right? Do you have methodologies that you employ? So if someone tells you the name of their child or their pet or something important to them, that you ideally are capturing that in some way, right? How would you say for yourself to where your strength is? From a place of personal narratives, Where would you say you fall out and how well you are able to weave in your own stories, right? Your own places where you have some example to share or to tell, right? Where you have able to relate to what someone's going through. Do you always feel like you can weave in and be able to connect with who you're communicating with through personal narratives, or do those never enter into your communications? Are you clear and concise in your communications? Right? Do you get to the point or do you wax on poetic? Right? Are you be able to start from a place of why you're there, what you're intending to communicate about, what you want to achieve with the communication, or do you bury the lead? How would you say your strength is in this area? Right? And is there an ask or a call to action when you do have a communication that's not just about listening, but about an invitation to something? Do you do that well? Are you forthcoming about where the invitation may lay? And are you able to make it personal? If you're going to communicate with someone, do they know why they are the person that you are communicating with, right? Why are you there for them? That you look to understand who they are in it. And finally, how well do you incorporate recognition and response into your communications? Do you acknowledge when someone has shared something with you and thank them for it? Right? Do you elevate that what they have given you as a place of your own learning and recognize that? So these are the different categories you say. I will say that I would agree, Janice, no one is supposed to be perfect. It's not that you have to be a 10. No one is terrible. It's not that you have to be a 1. What I'm just trying to do is to give you a frame to reflect on your own strengths of communication, right? In these areas, where do you shine? And also, where do you have the opportunity to deepen your own capacity for communication? And that's what I would give you a moment to go out and talk about, right? As we went through that exercise we just did, where are your greatest strengths as communicators that you should leverage more? Put that in the chat. Whoop, too many things at once and I lost it. 1 second. There we go. And then where are the opportunities for you to further develop strength as a communicator? A place of whether you rated yourself or you didn't, with the list of categories, if you will, of what indicates a strong communicator, where would you fall out? Where are your strengths and where are the strengths that you would like to develop? And I'll put the list of those categories in the chat as well. A few minutes for some peer-to-peer dialogue on that, of where you see your strengths and the strengths you want to develop. I'm going to give you some new people to talk to with some smaller groups. This way you have a chance for that interaction. I'll bring you back in about 4 or 5 minutes. All right. Welcome back. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we touch on the third and I would say probably in some ways most essential piece, which is communicating with care. Right? When we're talking about communicating with care, we're going beyond the clarity of messages, right? Clear messages inform, but care-centered messages are the ones that connect, as I'm sure each of you understand from the work that you do, right? And when people feel understood, that's when communication becomes a relationship. And so, what does communicating with care means? I mean, it means that every message is going to land inside someone's personal experience, right? What you say is going to somehow resonate with either what they're experiencing on a health journey, perhaps their fears or their hopes or their recovery journey. Certainly, family and caregiver relationships, right? Communicating with care means thinking about those, as well as what the identity and purpose is going to be after a major life event. And so, if we're thinking about this last aspect of communications, when it comes to communication with care, the first thing we're thinking about, there's really 3 signals, and the first is respect, right? That to acknowledge people's experience and perspectives, that Things such as saying many in this community have walked this journey themselves, or your experience is a valuable part of our shared learning, that you show respect for what you are being shared. Number two is simply presence, right? Demonstrating that someone is genuinely listening. You know the difference if someone is making eye contact with you, right? That they're patient with silence, that if they're reflecting back what they hear from you or asking a thoughtful follow-up question. You also know the difference if someone is looking over your shoulder to see who else is in the hallway, right? If have their phone face up on the table and keep looking down at it, or if they're worried about how many more people they need to get to and keep looking at it, right? And so presence unto itself is a demonstration of care, right? It's a demonstration showing that you are with the person. And validation, right? Here we're talking about simply recognizing that emotions and perspectives matter. You don't have to agree with someone you're talking to, right? Like that, they're not saying you have to agree with everything you hear. Validation is simply that you're acknowledging that what someone has experienced is real. That sounds like it was a difficult moment. Thank you for sharing that with us. We've talked about some of the structure of communication today, right? The idea of like not just being making awareness, but invitation. We've talked about inquiry and curiosity. We've talked about questioning, right? These three pieces, right? The respect, the presence, the validation. These are essential elements to going beyond that to actually demonstrating to someone that what they are sharing with you is something that you care about. And what does that look like, right? That looks like instead of moving quickly to solution, then instead you pause, right? And you ask someone how they would like you to show up, right? The difference between giving unsolicited advice and asking in that moment how you can be most helpful. Would you like advice? Do you just want someone to listen so you know who they need you to be? Right? It means instead of quickly shifting a topic, you again pause, right? And you recognize and reflect back that what they just told you was an important perspective. You don't just leave what they said on the table. And instead of filling silence, you allow space, right? You care often lives in the pauses between words. That may mean sitting in the room and allowing there to be silence, allowing them to be space for those places. Right. So as you think about your communications, right, some things that you can ask yourself as you go into them. First is what might someone hearing this message be experiencing today? What would my questions actually bring them? The second is what tone will communicate respect and empathy? How do I need my tone to sound to connect? And how can this message leave someone feeling supported and not just informed? You have information to share, but what else would give them that sense of support? Some self-reflective questions that I hope are helpful. Right? You all have a really unique power. Messages are really heard differently when they come from someone who has talked and walked a similar journey. And so how do you share live experience where appropriate, right? Where do you encourage others to share their stories? How do you create space for people to feel safe speaking? And empathy, probably the thing to model most of all.
Just a few minutes.
It is true. We're almost done. And so, if you think about a moment where someone communicated with you a way that they showed genuine care, right? If you think about your own life experience, what I ask you is, what did they do? Right? Like, what did they, when you felt listened to and cared about, what did they say? How did you feel after? Well, and what small element of that interaction could you bring into your own communication as a volunteer, as a leader, as someone going into those rooms? So that sort of brings us to the end, right? We're thinking about how we communicate better. And that means you need to communicate with clarity, helping people understand what matters, what comes next. Communicating with care, recognizing people bring their own experiences, fears, and hopes. And communicating with confidence, right? Sharing what you're there to do, the mission of Mended Hearts, how you're there to support them, the progress and possibilities that come about with energy and belief. Hopefully, these three things work together, where clarity can help people understand, care can help people feel seen, and confidence can help people move forward together. And so when someone leaves a conversation with you, either about the organization or just about what they are there, what you're there to represent, what do you hope they feel? And ultimately, that should be hopefully what sets the stage before you walk into a room. I'm not sure the kind of presentation gathers any questions, but I do hope that the hour together that we've spent both empowers the communications you already bring to these critical rooms that you walk into, as well as set the stage for the communications needed for you to be even more effective in the role that you play in providing insight and care to those that are in need. I appreciate you allowing me to communicate with you for the past hour and hope that somewhere within there, there's something that you're able to bring back and think about for your own communication and leadership journey.